Okay, good evening, everyone. It's Thursday, December 17th, 2015. I'm calling the Hingham Selectmen meeting to order.
Tuesday the 15th, by the way.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I'm ahead.
There you go.
Thank you.
Anything for you.
Strike that. It's Tuesday, December 15th. I'm calling the meeting to order, and at this point in time, do we have any minutes?
I don't think so.
Questions from the public regarding items not on the agenda? No questions. We'll get right into the budget hearing. We'll invite the treasurer collector to join us at the table. Gene, thank you.
So your first budget is the treasurer's, and you have Gene Montgomery, your treasurer, here. I'll give you the overview. It is on page 16 is the detail. The summary appears in the front of the book. And the treasurer's office requested a $384,555 budget. I recommended an entire amount. There were no additional requests. It represents a $554 decrease year over year and a 0.14% decrease year over year.
That's exactly right. It's fine. The increase, we have a moderate increase in expenses. That's just due to an escalation factor in the printing contract, and the payroll is actually down because the work week length. We have a 52.2 week year next year, and this year was 52.4, so we have a decrease in payroll, and that nets out to the 554. Do you have any other questions that I could answer for you?
Gene, I wonder, just while you're here for the audience, maybe if you could just take a minute and explain. We did a very big debt issuance this year, and you and your team play a really instrumental role in that. I just wondered if maybe you could describe sort of what takes place, because that's an aspect of your job that many of the taxpayers don't necessarily see in their normal course of doing business with you.
For a debt issuance that we did last year, what we issued was permanent debt, so it was a bond, and it's a process of compiling a picture of the town in a statement called an official statement, which is a combination of the financials and demographics and much information on how the town is doing across all levels. And that is then, we work with a financial advisor, we work with bond counsel, we work with our own team to kind of determine what we're going to be issuing debt for. Generally what we do here is we borrow short-term for a period of time, and then we roll it all in and go out to market, because it's fairly expensive when it's prudent to do so.
Oh, yeah.
And when the
Sure.
projects are wrapped up to the point that you can safely bond for long-term without risking any arbitration issues. And so we go out to market and we offer the debt issuance to the financial people out there, and we award the bid to the lowest net interest cost bidder. And it's basically a sale of the debt issuance. And it is awarded to the lowest bid, and we routinely do very well because we're well run, we're well respected, we're a AAA community, and so far that's done us very well.
And the amount of the debt issue, it was high 30 millions?
It was
I think 35, 40?
This was the middle school, and it was very high.
Yeah.
It was
It was close to 40 million.
40 million.
Yeah. Well, thank you for all your efforts on that. That was really very significant this past year, and it's great that we could lock in on some favorable long-term interest rates. So thank you to you and your team.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Gannon?
Sure. I want to echo those. Thank you very much. It's almost seamless, in terms of what your operation. So we don't always hear a lot about it per se, but that's only because you're doing such a good job. So thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anything else, I usually ask a lot of the folks, is there anything else that you would have liked to have had in here that wasn't asked for? Or?
No, we're business as usual,
Good.
and our costs have remained consistent, and so we're just very pleased that we could do a level services budget, so that some increases that we were going to sustain we're able to fund, and so we appreciate that.
Good, thank you.
I don't have anything to add, although I would like to thank you for all your good assistance on the Flag for Soldiers campaign. I thought that was a great undertaking, and great for morale. Thanks.
The only thing I would say to the public, just to, if you're out there, is that the real estate tax bills, we have had our rate approved, you've probably heard that. The bills have been committed over from the assessor's office to our collection system, and they will be mailed out the last week in December. But for those of you who like to pay that February bill before the close of the calendar year, and many people do for tax purposes, we do have those figures for you, so feel free to call the office. We can give you that information, and you can pay ahead of the time if you like. So that's my public service announcement.
Is there a way, since the journal is not here tonight, that we can put that into the journal? I think that people would appreciate knowing about that. Thank you for bringing it up tonight.
Yes, the finance team did a great job. Sue Nickerson and Rick Nowlin and the DOR, we had everything done early this year, which is a great, great assistance to us in our office, so we're very pleased.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, your next budget is the fire department. It appears on page 56, and we have the chief and deputy chief here with us. On a summary basis, I will tell you that the fire department submitted a budget of $54,416,677. It included a new position request and some additional expense money for some operational issues for $66,509. I have not recommended the new position this year. I think for some of the reasons that I've spoken to on some of the other issues, finances being the primary reason, but I have recommended the expenses of $4450 as they relate to some smaller operational issues that can be corrected. Overall, the budget I'm recommending to you is $5,421,127. It's a $129,408 increase year over year and a 2.45% increase year over year.
Well, first I just want to just give you a quick update on the Quint status. We have heard from the mechanic that it should be put back together in 7 days. So that's good news. We waited a long time for that. Also, quick report on the new engines. They're actually at the 98% completion at the factory in Pierce. 3 people from my department went out and inspected the apparatus. We do expect them to go to Minuteman in the next 7 to 10 days, where they'll have their final fit out, and then they should be in town sometime the end of January. Training will take place in February, and they'll go in service in February. We will have an open house when we get them, so that people can come in and see the fire engines and see the changes that we've made on the apparatus. That'll be announced later when the apparatus comes in.
Where will they be deployed?
Stations 2, North Hingham, and Station 3 in South Hingham. The other thing I'd just like to brief you on is with through the advanced technology that we've been able to do through the 911 grants through the SHREC, the department is now operational with mobile data terminals in both our fire engines and both our ambulances.
They might actually not. The SHREC is not a term that everybody...
Okay, the South Shore Regional Emergency Communications Center,
Regional Dispatch.
Regional Dispatch, has actually, through an emergency 911 grant, looked at putting mobile data terminals in all the police cruisers of the 4 towns and all the fire apparatus of the 4 towns. This provides a direct link to the computer-aided dispatch screen that the dispatchers are using, and it facilitates communication by letting us do certain things like check past calls on the way to the call, check the past calls that we've had there, and also check past troubles that we've had there. It's a tremendous tool. It's the start of phase 1 with the mobile data terminals in using the advances in technology to better do our job. And we have actually started with phase 2, where through the mobile data terminals we can control the status of the vehicles on the CAD system, on the air, responding, off at the scene, clear the scene, available for the next call. And we're still using radio signals to do this as well, but eventually we'll see where the technology takes us. It saves time for the dispatchers, and it gives better information to the people while they're responding to a call.
Does that locate the unit too, by GPS?
It doesn't locate the units by GPS. That was discussed at some particular point in time. It is possible to put GPS on the MDTs and then have that received back at the dispatch center. We have talked about that, particularly with the ambulances, to have the ambulance availabilities actually shown on a moving map at the dispatch center. That is being investigated as a possible phase in the future.
Is there a limitation as to how far out the ambulance will go in terms of shuttles, transports? Will it go to Boston?
There are certain protocols that we have to follow that are set by the Department of Public Health. Actually, I think I'm going to let the deputy answer that question.
Yeah, so certain situations require us to actually go to other hospitals besides South Shore Hospital. For example, South Shore Hospital is a level 2 adult trauma center. So if we have a trauma patient that's an adult, then our protocols actually require us to take them to that hospital. But they're not a pediatric trauma center. So there are situations where we're required by our protocols, our governing board for ambulance service, that requires us to go to Boston because it's a level 2 trauma, or level 1 pediatric trauma center. There are other situations as well. For example, someone with burns or anything else, then they have to go into Boston. So occasionally we do still transport into Boston, but we're fortunate that South Shore Hospital is able to provide extraordinary care, and most of our patients are able to go there. So,
Thank you.
And lastly, I'd like to say it's December to the public out there. It's time to change your smoke detector batteries.
Oh, very good. Is there a lifespan to smoke detectors, Chief?
Yes, there is. Usually it's about 10 years before the smoke detectors need to be changed. So the date is on the back of the smoke detector, which will tell you the date of manufacture, and approximately 10 years after that, the sensors in them start to go, so they need to be replaced.
Just a question on that, on the smoke detectors. Is there a new regulation regarding the smoke detectors, or could you just replace it with standard ones that you have in place over the years? I mean,
There's been a variety, and if we get this question all the time, there's so many different varieties. There have been changes in the law. And the thing that we tell the people when they're going to be replacing a system or changing a system out, if they have any questions, check our website. We have a brochure on there that talks about smoke detectors in Massachusetts and gives you that information, and you can always call our Fire Prevention Bureau at 781-741-1488 for additional information.
thank you.
Mary, you have questions?
Do you have some, did you want to walk us through a little bit on the budget?
Sure. Starting with the payroll, one of the things that is interesting, we asked for some additional funding for this because we have 3 shifts that run at 13 men and 1 shift that runs at 12. And we're looking for operational consistency just to be able to run all 4 shifts at a 13-man level, which is why we requested the additional funding for 1 additional firefighter paramedic to just make all our shifts at the 13 level. And that's the reason that we asked for the additional funding. Everything else is in line with what we normally do, and we have a current labor contract and agreement, so that these numbers are directly off the labor contract agreement.
May I ask a question about the salaries and the overtime? I'm noticing that the overtime from 17 to 16 is going up by about $38,000. If the request were granted to hire that additional firefighter, would there be some savings in the overtime? Could that offset some of those costs?
There would be a little bit. Right now, our overtime is figured on being able to purchase 9,664 hours of overtime for shift coverage to maintain manning.
Right, and I guess what I'm wondering is if you add that 13th person, theoretically, that would perhaps result in less of a need to draw from the overtime.
Yes, that's correct, yeah. We have a policy that we allow 2 people to be off at any particular time. So our normal complement of men is we maintain 11 people on duty at all times. So when we're at 13 with 2 people off, we do not have to hire.
Yeah.
The group that's at 12, when there's 2 people off, they're going to have to hire 1. So yeah, that would eliminate some of the overtime.
I think, perhaps because we're not voting on these budgets this evening, but I know you're heading to advisory, sometime in the next several weeks. It might be interesting to look at that overtime number and see if, again, what sort of the net request might be. And if, so that might be something to look at after this meeting.
We'll do that.
Quick question on that?
Sure.
So, Chief, is there any other compelling reason? I mean, just because I'm very interested, I know Mary's brought up some good points, I'm very interested in the request for the additional paramedics. So is there anything else that we should know about that may help us make a decision whether or not we want to fund that position?
Well, I think for us, it's more a matter of having consistency across all 4 groups. We try as much as we can in administration to make sure that we have 1 fire department and not 4. So the way that we operate on 1 group, we like it to be the same across all the groups. So it would just help us out with that kind of consistency across the board.
And why isn't it that way now? I mean,
we did a overtime versus manning study a couple of years ago, which actually the 2 lines crossed on a max-min scale at 12.75. So that's why we ended up at three shifts at 13 and 1 at 12, because the actual mathematical calculation showed that 12 and 3/4 men was where the overtime budget and the additional personal cost lines crossed. So, in the cost-benefit ratio, that's how we came up with that. And then I tried to go for the extra, but that was the advisory said, no, the line's crossed there, so that's good.
my just thinking is...
They rounded down.
They rounded down, yeah.
Sometimes that's why I'm asking, is sometimes you're thinking about the public and safety and medical care. It may not be a good idea just to look at the numbers as opposed to what you need. That's why I was asking.
Mm-hmm. It hasn't actually affected our manning because we've still been able to maintain the 11 constantly, 24/7, 365. So it hasn't affected our ability to serve the public.
Could you maybe talk a little bit about the education line? It seems like over the last few years, the department's been able to devote more resources, and I know some of that training is mandated, some of it are things that you believe are necessary. In the FY17, what sort of training will encompass that educational budget?
All right, well, I have to make a difference here between the training budget and the educational that you see. The educational is a collective bargaining agreement for college education. Mm-hmm. A long time ago, the fire service had something similar to the Quinn bill that the police have. And at some particular point, it was decided to freeze it with the fire department. And then later on, it was decided to do away with the educational benefit for the fire department. And it's been that way for a long period of time. What we're noticing is the fire service has actually changed over time, especially when we started to get EMS involved. And the people that we're getting in, a lot of those people actually have college degrees in fields that are related to their paramedic practice, in biology, in chemistry, and things like this. And it was brought up during the collective bargaining session. I think everyone sees a value in an educated workforce. And I think the numbers that you see here are a reflection of the firefighters realizing this as well, and then starting to utilize this, where in the past it had actually not been available to them. I think it's going to have the same effect to the fire service that the Quinn bill actually had with the police force. It's going to give us a much more educated, more professional force. So it's hard for me to argue against education because I'm well educated, Steve is well educated with college degrees, and we just see this as a plus for the kind of personnel that we want on the department moving forward. Absolutely. So I think that's why you see that educational increase is more and more people are now attaining fire science degrees where they weren't in the past.
And so the labor contract requires us to fund it.
I see.
We made an agreement that if they do this, then, we'll do
Yep.
the compensation.
Thank you. And then down in the expense line, then, the workshops and in-service program is, that's on-the-job training?
Yeah, I was going to let Steve talk about expenses, but that's the cost of us bringing programs to the department for our personnel. We do our own in-house training program, especially on the EMS side. Maybe I'll have the deputy speak to that.
Yeah, we typically, we have a number of our paramedics that are trained in providing CPR, which, we do for a community down at the community center. One of our individuals, Tom Jacinto, is, doing classes down there usually on a monthly basis. We've also, with that, gone and have worked with other town departments to provide CPR training or other things. We just recently did some training with the police for the Narcan. That was kind of a joint training session between our guys and with the police department. So we do a lot of in-house training on our own, especially on the EMS side, that we're mandated usually at least once a year, that our protocols, which is kind of like our workbook type of thing in a sense for all of the ambulance activities, they change, so we have to do updates. Anytime there's new care coming down, we have to do updates on that. We're also mandated, all of our EMTs and paramedics are required to attend training through South Shore Hospital. Typically, it's usually once a month. They have to go to a training class to review past cases and, talk about relevant issues, that are coming up or anything else. So we have a lot of that stuff, and then occasionally we will bring in other outside instructors. We contract currently with someone that comes in on a monthly basis as well to do EMS training, and usually we'll bring in someone on an annual basis to provide additional training classes that our guys aren't qualified to teach. So we really focus very highly on that. And to be honest with you, it's one of the things too that, beyond the fact that it's necessary to maintain good quality care, it's also required for our guys to get their recertifications. So every 2 years they have to go through and obtain certain amount of continuing education hours and all that. So we provide it for them, or in certain cases, if it doesn't work for their schedule, then we'll even send our guys to outside classes as well. So
Thank you.
Thanks for the good work you do, gentlemen.
Could I ask just a couple more questions?
You certainly may.
Was there anything else on the expenses that you wanted to cover, Steve?
Yeah,
Was
the
there
only-
anything that in particular stood out to you?
Yep, the only thing that, the only new expense that we can talk about is regards with the fire alarm system and the cost there. Basically, in a nutshell, what we're doing is we're in the process of eliminating the town-controlled fire alarm system, which part of it is radio signal, the other part is 1800s technology. And so we've been phasing that out through commercial buildings within town.
Yes.
Our goal is actually to probably have it completed, that the system will be done in August of 2016 is when we're looking at.
Fantastic.
So from from our own perspective, we now have to have someone else monitor it, because even though you would think, well, we're here 24/7, when all of our guys are out on a call, then there's no one in the building. So we still need to have someone monitor our fire alarm system. So that's what these expenses are, is that it's to make the changeover in our system to allow it to go to a monitoring company, and then there's an annual fee of about $1,300, or no, it's $1,800 for the annual fee to have that monitored from this point on. So it's actually going to save us money after this year, because there's the setup cost on it, and then the annual fee will be less than what we were funding the fire alarm system previously.
And I remember as well a few years ago that there is one vehicle that you have
Yes.
that helps
Yeah.
helps with all these call boxes,
Yeah.
that's been kind of held together with rubber
Yeah.
bands and duct tape, and so there's also a capital avoidance with this.
Yes.
Which is that if those call boxes were to remain in service, that equipment would have to be replaced. And I believe you had some personnel that were also dedicated to that.
We do.
So-
We have 2 employees that actually are paid an additional stipend because of the fire alarm, and they do a decent amount of work to maintain the system, which is paying it overtime and everything else. So yes, there'll be a cost to the department as well in that aspect. But and the replacement of the vehicle isn't even on our long-term capital.
Right.
So I don't know when that.
I don't think it would get by capital outlay.
It's in 1985, it's in good shape.
And Ted, I'm just wondering, as all of the, I know the school department last year was looking at monitoring others. Within the town, are we kind of trying to bundle our monitoring requirements so that we can, get a good rate with the monitoring services?
We're looking at that, yes.
I think that would be, that would just help.
The only other thing I wanted to add for a new initiative, which there's no additional cost for, is we're going to absorb it with some of the other funds, but we are also looking at using technology in-house to do other things. So one thing that we're looking at is scheduling software that would allow our guys to kind of process their vacation requests, process anything else like that. And that was initially the reason we started looking at it, is to kind of basically simplify our way of doing things and kind of become into the 21st century instead of antiquated, papers, checks and balances type of thing. So that was the initial thing that we looked at, and then once we started investigating some of these other programs, we realized that there's actually a lot of other things that we can do with some of this software. So one program that we're looking at also has a very, very good fleet maintenance program, which is something that we've wanted to do for a while, especially when you're looking at tracking vehicle replacement, what's the cost versus, the annual upkeep on it, etc. So this program will kind of handle a lot of those issues. It also has some other benefits that it can track our education, which, as I said, is mandated for us for our EMS training, but we also need to track on a fire level how much training each individual gets on an annual basis and look to identify strengths and weaknesses and what we need to focus on. So the software will do that. And finally, one thing that we realized again as another perk is that this system that we're looking at will really improve our tracking for the vacations, everything else, the other benefits that the guys have versus the way we do it now. And in certain situations, some of the programs can even integrate directly into the Munis system with the town. So this is something that we're looking at. We actually brought the police department in on one of the meetings to look at this, to see if this is something that, maybe they'd be interested in a similar program, because, like I said, it may not only help us over there, but it may help out over on the town hall level as well. So, and that's something that we're going to be able to do and absorb with current funds that we have in the budget. So.
Thank you.
Just a quick question. Can you tell me what the emergency callback, what is it? What is all that about?
Emergency callback is something that we use when we find, because of the emergency calls that were going on, we find that our manpower is depleted at this particular time. The most use of callback is called what we call an EMS callback. It's when both of our ambulances are transporting people to the hospital. That leaves our 11-man shift 4 people short. So we institute an emergency callback, which brings people back into work for a 3-hour minimum. And it boosts our manpower back up to 11 during that period that we're actually down to 7 people.
So it's overtime, but dedicated to the shift that just went off.
It actually happens during the shift. Let's say that it's 9 o'clock in the morning and Medic 3 is transporting to the hospital, and then at 9:15, Medic 2 is on a call, they're transporting to the hospital. We'll institute an EMS callback. We'll have maybe 2 or 3 people come in, which boosts our manning from 11 back up to 9 for that period of time until the ambulances return. And so we only use it when we actually have those particular manpower shortages. If we have a call where everyone's involved in the call, say 2 engines are working involved in a call, and we only have one engine left in the town, we'll institute what's called a box alarm callback, which does the same thing. It brings people in, they man the spare apparatus. On the EMS callback, when they come in on the callback, they actually man the third ambulance. So it puts a third ambulance in service. We only use it in those times when the emergency situations in the town have drained our manpower below a certain point. It's actually a very effective use of overtime money.
It's because some of these things can tie up our manpower for hours, you know. For example, if we had a longer incident like a fire or anything else,
Or
then
cardiac.
yeah, or even a critical patient. There are many times that we may send 3 or 4 of our crew members to the hospital in the ambulance, you know, just because the patient requires that much level of care. So now we're stripping, you know, that many
people?
Oh yeah. We'll have 3 people in the back and the 1 person driving, you know, so we'll do that on a normal basis. And so it's just something that this allows us to get more people back in to supplement our staffing. So,
And it helps you maintain that 11
Yep.
during the shift.
yep.
Yeah, Paul, if I can just put it in perspective, if we do have a CPR, a cardiac call, there's one person doing the bagging at the head, there's another person doing the chest
Yeah,
compression.
no, I got that
Yeah.
part, yeah.
So it takes 3 people in the back.
Get a little tired doing CPR.
You do, especially with the new rates of compression.
And the standards, they basically recommend you switch out every minute, you know,
Yep.
switching from one person to the next. And so it's just, again, we have to look at it that we treat the call that's going on at the time.
Sure.
So if we need to send 4 people to the hospital, that's our policy, 4 people go to the hospital, you know. There have been times we've sent 5 people. That gets a little crowded, but, you know, it's happened, so.
In a multi-trauma situation.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for everything that you do.
All right, great.
Thank you.
All right, your next batch of budgets, we have everybody here at the table, I think, for this. Betty will be taking most of them. The first one is Selectmen. It appears on page 2.
But we had one additional request, and that was again this year, I've requested a part-time grant writer. It would be very useful, I think, to have someone who would seek out and be able to write grants for all departments within town, have the person located within the selectman's office. And it is a part-time position. I think ultimately the position would pay for itself a year or 2 down the road once you got it up and going. I know the budgets are tight this year, so Ted was not able to recommend it.
So if you ask me if there's anything that the Selectmen's office want that we didn't put forward or get, that's it, right there. We've been asking for this for 4 years, can't get it past the manager, the administrator. I think every single department head that works with the grant writing process, conservation, harbor master, you know, town engineer, they all repeatedly talk to me about the amount of time that takes out of their job, because it's such a specialized craft, and having somebody that they go to that could manage that process and they could just give them the knowledge about the particular project would be invaluable. It would save a tremendous amount of time and energy, but every year it bumps up against, you know, real people that we have to decide whether we can expand the existing operation. So.
Well, didn't the harbor master write a grant application for that boat, that fancy boat we've got?
Sorry, do I know how to write it?
No, didn't the harbor master?
Harbor Master wrote it, yes. We've gotten, I mean, it's $440,000 we got. It was an enormous amount of time and energy out of his day-to-day schedule to get something like that done.
The theory would be that there are different grant opportunities, and while there is some specialized knowledge, there is also specialized knowledge with grant writing. And some, whether a grant is in conservation or maybe the harbor master, a person in a grant writing role can pull together the application, help the town put its best case forward, and then leverage the department heads for the technical expertise on the specific request.
Sure.
And it, you know, conceivably, it is a position that has the potential to pay for itself. The difficulty is always when you're adding something like this, it's,
What do you take away from?
you know, you have to look at the experience first. And, you know, what I would say is that it probably, you know, it it takes a little bit of pressure off the conservation officer, a little pressure off the harbor master. And I think there's value to that as well, that, you can't always quantify.
And they would also be able to find grants that, each of those individuals get grants that flow through to them, so to speak, as opposed to proactively going out and getting grant funding. And, actually even exploring private grant funding is something that most municipalities don't do. Because, we don't have those kind of resources to start tracking through the world of private funding.
Just as an example, several years ago, we used a private grant writer on a contract basis to do the GAR Hall grant. We were very successful with that grant.
So question is, I know this came up last year, Betty, right?
Yes.
And,
I keep asking, Paul.
no, but I think if I remember correctly, I was favorably disposed for the reasons you've given, and I look at our budget, it's actually gone down, right? I mean, if I'm reading the numbers right, and it seems to make some sense if it if the reality is it may pay for itself. I'm just trying to remember last year, I don't know, we just didn't.
It comes down to the same thing like you're going to come down to this year. I could have made it more difficult and said, yeah, I'm going to recommend it to you, and then the $550,000 deficit is now $575. We're moving in the wrong direction. And as you noticed, I recommended $230,000 of $750 in additional requests. So there's just not a lot of extra money this year to go around, unless something pops and we get more revenue coming through some unexpected source, which I think is highly unlikely. We're going to be in a really difficult year to meet some basic needs of departments. As you remember, this forecast has a school budget in at 2%, and we're at a $500,000 deficit. You're just not going to be able to fund that budget at 2% and keep the staff that's there. So we have a lot of work to do.
And the budget projections aren't really complete yet, right? You're just preliminary. I remember last year it was...
Yeah, they always change, Paul, but what I'm saying to you is they're not going to change that much this year. There's not that much revenue growth because a big chunk of it is off the table from new growth. So we're going to be up against it this year. Flat.
And, with the school budget in at 2%, an extra 2% on $45 million is $900,000. So if the school budget comes in at 4%, our deficit grows by $900,000. If it comes in at 6%, so there are still some different moving parts in a lot of this to help us get the full picture, which I think is one reason why we're not going to vote these right now, but try to see how some of those things fall into place early in January.
And I appreciate that. I think I have the same feeling I had last year. Is it makes sense to try to find a way to make certain things happen like this, and certainly other things. And this is not a voting night. I'm just voicing some support for the concept, and we'll revisit it, I'm sure.
Mr. Higgins.
Bob Higgins, Higgins Water Commission. I would like to support that.
Got to come up here, Bob.
They can't hear you on the TV unless you're 12 inches from the microphone.
Okay. Thank you. Bob Higgins, Hingham Sewer Commission. I fully support grant writing, and I'll tell you why. I've been wrestling with this now for the last several months as we have projects up and coming in the sewer department that are going to need funding, okay, a lot of funding. And I spoke to Stephen Lynch, Congressman Stephen Lynch, last year at the town meeting about the federal monies available for infrastructure improvement and so forth and so on. And at the time, it was unfunded. But now they, for this next budget, and I don't know if they have funded infrastructure improvements or not with federal grants. The state also has a revolving fund that can be utilized. But it's my sense that looking and at all of these different departments to get all these big fundings, I'm certainly not capable of chasing down these other things. We need somebody to chase down, maybe through environmental grants or some other departments in the government that could, we could at least take a shot at it. And the state's revolving fund is another issue. I think there might be more than one department that's under the umbrella of the Department of Environmental Services, I guess. But yeah, I guess you have to file to each budget, So I would just support doing that if you can find the money to do that. And I can certainly, I'd be happy to help out in my own group, and I've been writing letters to myself and trying to figure out how am I going to address the issues that I'm looking to get money for. And it's cumbersome. And you really have to know what you're looking for, which I do at least anyhow, but I don't know if I can translate that to the grantors to get any money. So if you can do that, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
All right, your next budget is the legal budget, appears on page 18. Betty, well, why don't you go over your recommended increase?
Well, I have requested an increase of $65,000. I based this request on the 10-year history of legal expenses that you'll find on page 20 in your book. The last 5 years, your legal expenses have averaged $334,000 a year. And that's exclusive of the Hersey House settlement and Aquarion Water. Those are just the legal expenses themselves. We seem to be trending down in the past 5 years. We're making progress, but we're still significantly higher than what our budget is, so every year we're asking for a reserve fund transfer. There are several things in the next year or two that I know will be coming up that will require a fair amount of legal time through the permitting boards and that sort of thing.
I've recommended a smaller increase, likely primarily because of what I'm looking at the bottom line, and also a little bit of judicious belt-tightening, and hope that we can continue to try to manage that budget better and better. It's a challenge. You could see the trend had been, it was heading down, and it's leveled off now. But, you know, I do hope that we will be able to continue to manage this budget down. I can say that we haven't had very many litigations filed against us in the last several years, and, you know, that's a product of deploying, especially land use counsel, but also litigation counsel and labor counsel early in the process, so that mistakes aren't made before we wind up into a larger legal action. Also understanding what each of the legal actions are. So some of the things advisory asked for about 4 or 5 years ago that we've put in, I think, are very valuable. We ask the attorneys for a budget when we give them work to do, and we track it. So I think the controlling of the use of counsel has been helpful in trying to ameliorate the pressure on this budget upwards.
I think there's another piece that the advisory committee asked for when I was sitting on it, which was that there be a process for accessing legal services, because I think there was a time when counsels were being contacted directly, and I think we've put a process into place where requests to counsel should go through the assistant town administrator. My impression in the last year or so is that perhaps we've gotten a little bit away from that sometimes, and I would hope that we could return to that practice. I think it ensures that taxpayer dollars are spent efficiently, and it avoids duplication. So instead of a lawyer having a conversation with multiple members of a board, it's one conversation through the town administrator team, or through one designated party. I think that'll help manage the costs.
Well, we have that process in place. All the boards and committees and departments cannot access counsel. Counsel's been told not to communicate with anybody in the community other than this office. It's just really the Board of Selectmen's office. I think that the three of you are the only ones who contact counsel outside of anyone in this room, and Betty and I.
And if we're requiring other departments to do that, we should walk the talk.
Yeah,
I'll have to leave that to you.
yeah, I would just disagree with that. Mayor, you obviously you can decide not to speak to legal counsel, but just recently you asked me to speak to legal counsel, and you know, so I mean, I'm not. So I'm just saying the bottom line is that I found without legal counsel assistance, I wouldn't be able to do my job, and I work through Betty all the time, but there are times where I need to get an answer from something that's very important, and they've been very good. And I think they save time and effort, and they actually help us do our job better. So, you know, we can always count the beans, so to speak, but my opinion is they help us do our job. and I'm going to make a decision that I think is in the best interest of the town. You may not want to do that, you may want to rely on something else. That's your decision.
Yeah, well, I also like to make decisions in the best interest of the town. I think my experience has been that there are times when calls to council create delays in getting work done, and I think that council works for the board, not in individuals. And it's been my experience that that sometimes, well, council works for the board as a whole, and council is not our personal councils. And certainly there are matters such as a conflict of interest or, other matters where we individually have conversations with council. I think we should all look at the degree to which we are engaging with council and see if there are situations when working through the town administrator team would allow us all to get the quality support that we count on and that we appreciate from our legal team, but perhaps a little quicker and in a little more cost-effective way.
Yeah, and that's fine. We can agree to disagree. I think I get it fairly quickly from speaking to them directly because I understand what they're talking about. And so there's not a lot of delay, on my part anyway.
My comment is I'm a lawyer. So I try to reason out some of the problems confronting us, but I'm also a taxpayer, and I'm extremely sensitive that every time I pick up the phone to call any of these guys that I'm on the clock. So I try to minimize that. I'm hoping that, you are too. I have no idea.
Sure.
I don't track your calls. I just rely on your sense of integrity, each of you,
Exactly.
not to overdo it. And
Same back, yeah.
yeah, so, I mean, if it's going to become a problem, I suppose we'll have to address it, but, I like the idea of shooting the question and the problem to the town administrator so we don't have multiple tongues going on the same issue. And, if the town administrator can get the response we need, if there's any question, we're covered. Without a lot of fanfare and without a $5,000 bill for something that, may largely be common sense. Let's move on.
All right, your next budget is Town Hall. Appears on page 43.
Hopefully that'll be
There are no additional requests. I've recommended the budget as submitted. Betty, you want to give any highlights?
It's pretty much just the same as this year. There's no change. There's a slight increase in the lunchroom supplies that corresponds with a slight increase in sales in the lunchroom, so.
great.
Good news.
All right, the next budget is town meeting. It appears on page, actually, 21, so we're going to go backwards a little bit.
Town meeting is based on a two-night annual town meeting with no special town meetings. That's the way the budget is crafted each year. The only increase this year is the cost of advertising has gone up significantly. As you know, we publish a portion of the warrant, the beginning and the end, in the journal each year. And as you can see, last year the actual went up significantly, so.
Is that a legal requirement that we do that?
Yes. It's our bylaw requires that we do it.
It couldn't simply be posted on the website?
We post it on the website. We have to post it with the town clerk, and the bylaw requires that it be delivered to each household and that it be advertised in the Hingham Journal.
So
At one point-
before we can do anything about that, we'd have to modify that bylaw.
Yeah.
At one point, a few years back, we looked at the possibility of not sending it out to each residence and making it available online and available, printing a smaller number and making it available if anyone wanted a printed copy. But that too would require a bylaw change.
Okay.
The meeting enhancements that you and the moderator have made in the past few years have improved town meeting.
Credit goes to the moderator.
Thanks to both of you. It's
We'll give a shout out to Steve
nice
Becker,
improvements.
too.
And yes, the
Because,
technology.
Steve Becker and Kate are the ones who wrote
Yes.
those programs to get people in and out a little quicker, so.
Yes.
All right, your next budget is unclassified on page 164.
Let's see.
Unclassified represents the category in the Uniform Massachusetts Accounting System of miscellaneous, the catch-all.
And this budget is exactly level with last year.
No changes.
Caretakers of the clocks.
Yep. We pay someone to take care of the clocks. They come in, they fix them, they wind them, you know, they're old, sometimes they break, and they need maintenance.
They're minor repairs, they're, not significant repairs that you're looking at, say, at New North at this point.
Is that like the library clock?
That's.
These are all the hand-wound clocks, right?
These are New North, the one at
Oh, okay.
Dependable Cleaners, and the one at the Congregational Church.
I think that's a great feature. I think that's part of the town's history that should be maintained. Glad you recommended that there, Mr. Alexiadis. Thank you very much.
And that's all the budgets we have for you tonight. And I know we keep appointments and Selectmen Town Administrator reports, but council here, and I think advisory's ready for you.
Are we ready to vote on this possible vote? To appoint an independent hearing officer?
It's not, it's up for you guys.
I should probably step away from the
I
table.
think at our last meeting, things were still in process with council, and is there any new information, or is there an update? Okay. When do you anticipate the letter will go to the Ethics Commission, because it's been 26 days since the request was made?
I've been communicating through the Selectmen's office, updating you, and I expect more information tomorrow.
Okay, I'm going to put on the agenda for Thursday, which will be 28 days. I would note that Chief Olson has asked us to appoint an independent hearing officer on a personnel matter. This affects people. It affects employees. I think we have a responsibility to the chief. I think we have a responsibility to the affected employees. And I understand and I respect that it is your right to get an opinion from the Ethics Commission. I have to say that I'm really stunned at why it's taking 26 days to get the letter into the Ethics Commission, especially when we know that the Ethics Commission will take 30 days. And for the third time, I will urge both you and Ted and Betty, if there's anything that you can do to facilitate council's working with Paul on this. This could have been, there was a choice in doing this with the attorney of the day or doing a formal letter. I don't think this should take 26 days. And I really hope that on Thursday night, there's some news to report, because the police chief has asked us to do something. It's really important that we get this matter behind us so that we can, for everyone's sake. So I'll look forward to talking about it again on Thursday.
Mary, just so you know, I'm going to remind you that you specifically asked me to take a specific course of action, which involves a delay. So what you requested, and I accommodated you, is causing the delay. I just want you to be aware of that.
No, I asked you for to get an opinion from council on a conflict
Town council.
From town council on a potential
Exactly.
conflict of interest. That could have taken a shorter period of time. You have the option, which is your right, to get an opinion from the Ethics Commission, which could take 30 days. But the clock hasn't even started on that 30 days. I don't understand why, once I made that request, it's a conversation with council, it's getting the necessary information and getting the letter together. I think it's pretty straightforward. And I'm, again, very surprised that it's taking 26 days to get that opinion. And I'm not the cause of the delay on this. I made the request. The request could have been processed sooner, and I hope it will. I hope that we will have some new information on Thursday, because we need to get moving on this.
Mary, I took your request literally, and we only have one town council, and that's who you asked me to get the opinion from. And last week I told you he was looking into one other piece of information, which he did get. So I'm updating you to the Selectmen's office. You're telling me you don't know, but I did last week convey information to the Selectmen's office, just like I told you I would.
You know,
So you may not like the pace of it. You asked for that process, and the 30 days is not my doing. It's because the town council is making an opinion, and it requires us to go to the state ethics. So,
but the Ethics Commission time of 30 days hasn't even started, because we've been sitting here for 26 days trying to get this. I asked for an opinion from council as to a conflict of interest. Council could have, if you chose, council could have given that to you and not involve the Ethics Commission. It is certainly your right to go through the Ethics Commission. You can do that through the attorney of the day and get an answer in a day, or you can get a formal opinion from Ethics Council, from the Ethics Commission, and that takes 30 days. My concern, Paul, is that 30 days hasn't started because the letter's not there yet. So right now, if the Ethics Commission takes 30 days, it'll be 56 days. And I think we got to get moving on this. And I would just ask you to please continue to work with council, and let's get this letter to the Ethics Commission. And if there's something that you need from the town administrator's office to help you and help council get that letter to the Ethics Commission, you know, I hope you'll ask. I'm sure they'll be happy to help. The clock hasn't even started on the 30 days, and that's that part we can control. So I would appreciate it if we could continue to push on that. It boggles my mind that this is taking 26 days, and I hope we can get it to the Ethics Commission soon.
I think you're getting it mixed up, Mary, because once you asked me for a specific course of action, when the meeting was over, I spoke to Ted about it and said, what is the process? Because I had no idea. Getting the opinion of legal counsel, town council, and then it goes to state ethics for 30 days. When Ted told me that, I had no idea that was the process. Maybe you didn't either, but that's what you asked me to do, is get an opinion from town council. So I took you literally, and I did that. I took the advice of our office and also town council. So when you say I could have done something, I don't think you're accurate, but I'm telling you I'm following the advice of town council. I've spoken to him continuously about this matter. You asked for this process, and I am doing my best, as I've told you. So if you're not satisfied, I'm sorry, but that's what you asked me to do, and that's the way it's working out.
Yeah. I think that there are some delays in here that are unnecessary, and if necessary, you know, if we're going to sit and have the same conversation at every meeting, perhaps we should ask council to come in and speak to us about this, because again, I don't understand why this is taking 26 days to get to the Ethics Commission.
Sure, we can have council.
Somebody's dropped the ball, and
we can have council here at your
pick it up.
next meeting if you'd like.
We need to pick up the ball, and we need to get this to the Ethics Commission.
Okay, I'm certainly willing. There's been no. Betty, have you fulfilled any requests or any outstanding requests on this matter? There's nothing on my table for this. Everything that's been asked for me has been, and I think Betty was asked to send some copies in a while ago, and long.
Day after the meeting.
Yeah, that was the day after.
So there's
the
been
meeting.
no requests of our office, no updates on our office. I did speak to John Coughlin last week, asked him where the letter was, and he said he was still going over some things with Mr. Gannon, at Mr. Gannon's request, so they're working on it.
Okay. All right, well, we'll hopefully have some news on Thursday.
Okay. Let's see on the agenda, executive session? Okay.
Do we need to vote?
Okay.
Vote to go into executive session.
Yep. I'll make a motion to move into executive session to discuss strategy with respect to ongoing litigation with the Aquarion Water Company, since discussion in open session may have a detrimental effect on the litigating position of the town.
Aye.
Roll call vote?
I'll second, sir.
Chair needs to declare that we'll have a detrimental effect.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan.
And not to return.
The chair so declares,
Not to return.
and not that this, since discussion in open session may have a detrimental effect on the litigating position of the town, we will not resume open session.
I'll second the motion if I hadn't already.
Roll call vote?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, Mr. Ryan.
Aye.
Good night, everyone. See you Thursday.